Good morning, students. I hope this finds you well and safe. This is our lecture for April the 23rd. We've been discussing Islam, and we ended up talking about the power of the Caliphate of Baghdad. And quite honestly, after those glory days, as many people call them, several things took place. Number one, there were battles with Christian crusaders over the holy sites in Palestine in the 12th and 13th centuries. And I might point out, ultimately, the Muslims won these conflicts. Of the numerous crusades that took place, probably the first one was the most successful. Jerusalem was captured. But from then on, as subsequent crusades took place, the Christians began a series of setbacks and losses from which ultimately they could not recover. After that, there seems to be a spread of Islam into India, China, Central and Southeast Asia. And then the final big development within Islam will be the growth of the Ottoman Empire during the 16th century. And it will become a very huge conglomerate indeed. Okay, but even during the Ottoman Empire, when they dominated what are now various Arab states, they had not enjoyed the golden years of the Abbasid Caliphates. Okay, during the beginning of the industrial age, as the European countries were moving out of their medieval twilight, as your textbook calls it, many Islamic nations chose not to follow that path of modernization. They chose to remain in pre-industrial societies. Now, the Renaissance will begin in Italy around the 14th century, and part of that will be due to the conquest of Constantinople and many of those scholars fleeing to the West. But as the Renaissance takes hold, a lot of advancement begins to take place in Western Europe. And as it does, basically the Arab states kind of ho-hum, and all they are concerned about is to know the Quran and to apply it to their lives. And so Muslim scholars are going to assume an attitude of new knowledge is something that should be viewed with suspicion, particularly when it originates outside the Muslim community. And so many Muslim communities will retreat into isolationism. After defeating the Crusaders, the Muslims, quite honestly, felt pretty good about themselves. We defeated the European countries. We are superior to them. And at that point in time, militarily, definitely they were. But let's think of another consequence of those crusades. The crusades left a tremendous, shall I call it, wound in the Muslim mind. Now, the crusades were brutal on both sides, but it left a bad taste in the mouth of Muslims, and that bad taste, quite honestly, exists even into our world today. Muslims still harbor a bitterness regarding the Crusades. And I would say, for the most part, when Muslims look toward Christianity, all they see is the Catholic Church. They don't see the various Protestant churches and so on. And so they developed this sense of cultural and intellectual superiority. And as the balance of power began to shift toward Western Europe, they just kind of got left out of that for a while. And then, quite honestly, there were a lot of conservatives within the Islamic faith, and they just did not want any kind of change. And so the world that had been some of our leaders as far as technology and other things went will begin to descend and allow Western Europe to rise and actually summit way higher than the Muslim states had ever done. Now, the isolation of the Muslim world really came to a screeching, grinding halt in the early part of the 20th century. World War I brought the Ottoman Empire into that struggle on the side of Germany and Austria, and they lost. And when they did, the victorious Allies, especially the British and the French, began to take control of the Middle East. And in doing so, the territory of the Ottoman Empire was developed into independent nations, but only after they had been occupied by the various Western nations. And boundaries tended to group various sects that we talked about, the Sunnis and the Shias, and we mentioned this in the former lecture. It tended to put them together in unequal balances, and of course, as a result of that, tended to create problems within those nation states, because the majority would dominate the minority would not appreciate that, and there would be difficulties. But really, since the 1970s, the Muslim states can no longer be overlooked, because they were found to be one of the richest areas in the world with crude oil. And in 1979, they proved this when they established an oil embargo that sent fuel prices in the United States skyrocketing, and suddenly America's great love affair with big, fast, powerful automobiles came to an end, and Americans started buying foreign cars because they were so much more petroleum economically. And so we have to reckon with them. They control a great part of the oil, and how they handle their reserves has a very huge impact on how the rest of the world can function. And so, Islam sort of had a revival. First, there were some reform movements from within. We mentioned the Arab Spring of 2011. That really did not accomplish that much, other than young people were able to express themselves in some ways they had probably never done before. in these various Muslim states. Now, in 2015, the president of Egypt called for some reforms, and he desired a more moderate form of Islam. Of course, he was reacting to some of the more radical elements of Islam, for sure. And you have had a major Islamic missionary effort made, once again, in Africa. And in Africa, Islam and Christianity are many times going head up against each other. Serious competition. And sometimes this serious competition can lead to fighting and murders and so on. But there is a big effort, and what they are saying is that Christianity is a white religion. And that is how they are trying to sell Islam to the African people. Now, as a result of Islamic immigration into Europe, you have some very large Muslim communities in Europe, and you are seeing more and more Muslim communities appearing in the U.S. And one place Islam is catching on in the U.S. is in the prison system. They are working with dissatisfied individuals who are on the fringes of society anyway, and they are working to bring them within the Muslim fold. And so many African Americans, actually since the 60s, have begun embracing Islam again because they look at Christianity as having been a white religion. And obviously in Africa, during the age of imperialism, the colonial powers did abuse the African people and try to literally cram Christianity down their throats. So, as we mentioned with Christianity, it is making great strides in sub-Saharan Africa, but there is this competition going on between the two religions. Now, as we think about the calendar and holy days, Islam has its own distinctive calendar. It is made up of 12 lunar months of 29 or 30 days, and so they have a total of 354 days a year instead of 365. And so they have a different calendar year than obviously the rest of us do. Now they have several feasts that they celebrate. They have a big celebration of their new year, and obviously they celebrate the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad. But as we think about Islam today, it is powerful in many of the emerging third world nations, and it has once again become a growing religion. And with that, you have Islamic fundamentalism. And the fundamentalists are the ones who have been so much involved in world terror through the last number of years. And so, as we think about this, Muslims divide the world into two parts. You have Islam with its truth, and you have the rest of the world with its ignorance, disbelief, corruption, and disobedience. Now, fundamentalists wish to impose what is called Sharia law in all Islamic communities, but they would love to bring it to Islamic communities in the U.S., Germany, and other places. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany has told Muslims they're welcome to move in, but they are going to obey German laws, not bring their own laws in. And so there is a tension among many Muslims regarding older and new ways. Now, that being said, in the United States, with some traditions being kept, you will see many Muslim young people very much trying to be like American young people. Now, Muslim young women will generally wear their scarves. Even in the United States, there are some who will remove them when they go into a university situation, and then they'll put them back on when they're in a family situation. But many of these young people want to be just like American young people. They're all not carrying knives. They're all not out there for assassination or whatever. And so there is a struggle. In the Middle East, we have a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. They tried to come to power during the Arab Spring. And the Muslim Brotherhood, like the Taliban and like many other groups, ISIS and so on, would love to destroy the United States that they view as the enemy and build an Islamic superstate and obtain world domination. And so this is something that people must be aware of, because not all Muslims are benign, not all Muslims want peace. There are many who would love to be able to dominate and be able to dominate the world in a big way. Okay, this ends our textbook study. Now, I'll pause here and say some things. Number one, I hope as we've had to make these adjustments here the last few weeks that they have not upset you and disrupted your school year too much. I have tried in these lectures to give you everything that I would have given you in class, and hopefully you have found these beneficial. The last test that we will take will cover the Far Eastern religions as well as the Middle Eastern religions. It will be a test like the last one you took. It will have questions that you may use both your textbook and your notes to answer. And I would like you to answer these questions for sure in a great deal of detail, since I am allowing you to use textbook and so on. And so if I'm going to load the test earlier than the week of final exams, so if you decide you would like to take that test early, please feel free to do so. And I will get it graded and get your grade posted and so on. Because we are a test short, the grade book in eLearn will not reflect your final average. You can look at your grades and figure out from there your final average, but because we are a test short, it will not accurately reflect that. But believe me, my physical grade book that I use will. Students, I want to wish you your very best in your future. I hope you have great, great success. And as promised, I'd like to read to you a little bit out of the Quran, because most Americans are totally unfamiliar with this book. And I'm just going to kind of read some various areas within the book just to give you some ideas of some of their thinking. For example, Surah 19 is entitled Maryam. By the way, that is the Muslim term for Mary, the mother of Jesus. And in some of the passages, it is said, passage 27, they say, O Maryam, surely you have done a strange thing. Verse 29, she pointed to him. They said, how should we speak to one who was a child in the cradle? And he said, surely I am the servant of Allah. He has given me the book and made me a prophet. He has made me blessed wherever I may be, and has enjoined on me prayer and poor rate so long as I live, and dutiful to my mother, and he has not made me insolent, unblessed. And peace be on me on the day I was born, and on the day I die, and on the day I am raised to life, such as Isa, and that is their term for Jesus, the son of Maryam. This is the saying of truth about which they dispute. Now, if you recall in an earlier lecture, I made the point that they dispute many things with Christians concerning Jesus. But here is a major point. 35. It beseems not Allah that he should take to himself a son. Glory be to him. When he has decreed a matter, he only says to it, be, and it is. So as I said, one of the big points of difference and contention that they have is that Jesus is the Son of God. And Muslims say, no, he is not. In the chapter 9 on repentance, verse 30, and the Jews say Uzzar is the son of Allah, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are the words of their mouths. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. May Allah destroy them, how they are turned away. So very much, I want you to understand that they do deny Jesus as being the Son of God. We also said they denied the death and resurrection in Surah 4. And they're saying, surely we have killed the Messiah, Isa the son of Maryam, the apostle of Allah, and they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it appeared to them so, like Isa, the most surely those who differ therein are only in doubt about it. They have no knowledge respecting it, but only follow a conjecture, and they killed him not for sure. So definitely there is a denial of Jesus being the Son of God. In the second surah, the Cow, 135, and they say, be Jews or Christians, you will be on the right course. Say, nay, we follow the religion of Ibrahim, the Haf, and he was not one of the polytheists. And of course, as I say, looking at Christianity and the fact that they believe in the Godhead, they, of course, have a tremendous problem with what they consider to be polytheism. A couple of statements in the third surah. He has revealed to you the book with truth, verifying that which is before it. He revealed the Torah and the gospel aforetime, a guidance for the people, and he sent the Quran. It is he who has revealed the book to you. Some of its verses are decisive. They are the basis of the book, and others are allegorical. So this particular passage kind of gives some ideas that there can be some interpretation in the understanding of the Quran. But most of your strict Inmans today obviously do not believe that. In this same Surah 19, surely the true religion with Allah is Islam. And then it goes on to say, let not the believers take the unbelievers for friends rather than believers. And whoever does this, he shall have nothing of the guardianship of Allah. Oh, kind of interesting that they would recommend not having friends among Christians. Continuing in 85, and whoever desires a religion other than Islam, it shall not be accepted of him, and in the hereafter he shall be one of the losers. 102, and do not die unless you are Muslims. So Islam obviously is a very, very inclusive religion and does not recognize the viability of Christianity. Okay, let's read a couple of other passages. Still in this third surah. And if you are slain in the way of Allah, or you die, certainly forgiveness from Allah and mercy is better than what they amass. And if indeed you die or you are slain, certainly to Allah shall you be gathered together. And then we just kind of flip over to the very next page. And reckon not those who are killed in Allah's way as dead, nay, they are alive and are provided sustenance from their Lord. So encouraging people to engage in warfare. Going on, therefore, who fled and were turned out of their homes and persecuted in my way, who fought and were slain, I will most certainly cover their evil deeds. I will most certainly make them enter gardens beneath which rivers flow, a reward from Allah, and Allah is yet better reward. And so it promises those who fight that they will receive special benefits. And that is an interesting incentive for a lot of these radical Muslims today. Okay, Surah 4 is actually entitled Women. And some interesting statements here. And if you fear that you cannot act equitably toward orphans, then marry such women as seem good to you, 2 and 3 and 4. And Muhammad was known to marry young women all the way down to the age of 12. And so, obviously, Islam does not necessarily frown upon that. All right. Verse 11, Allah enjoins you concerning your children, the male shall have the equal of the portion of 2 females. So obviously the male is viewed above the female. O you who believe, it is not lawful for you that you should take women as a heritage against their will. And yet, oftentimes this will be ignored, especially when warfare is taking place. And marry not women whom your fathers married, except what has already passed. So, is this saying a young man can marry his father's widow? You tell me. And lawful for you are all women besides these, provided that you seek them with your property, taking them in marriage, not committing fornication. So they do expect, even if you have multiple wives, that you marry. And whoever among you has not within his power ampleness of means to marry free believing women, then he may marry of those whom your right hand possesses from among your believing maidens. So marry them with the permission of their masters. And then if they are guilty of indecency, they shall suffer half the punishment which is inflicted upon free women. Men are maintainers of women because Allah has made some of them to excel others, and because they spend out of their poverty. The good women are therefore obedient, guarding the unseen as Allah has guarded. And as to those on whose part you fear discretion, admonish them, and leave them alone in the sleeping places, and beat them. If they obey you, do not seek a way against them. Surely Allah is high and great. So I will say, when I have shared this with any class, I have never had any of the young women decide that they're ready to convert to the Islam religion, to say the least. Still in this chapter on women, and whoever fights in the way of Allah, then be he slain or be he victorious, we will grant him a mighty reward. And what reason have you that you should not fight in the way of Allah? Those who believe fight in the way of Allah. Therefore, if they do not withdraw from you and do not offer you peace and restrain their hands, then seize them and kill them wherever you find them. And against these we give you a clear authority. You who believe, when you go to war in Allah's way, surely the unbelievers are your open enemy. Okay, just reading some of these passages, you are able to make up your mind. Is the violence that comes out of Islam something that is contained within it, or is it simply extreme expressions? You make up your mind. You understand. But in reading this, you can understand why so many people in the United States misunderstand Islam. Now, again, let me say, all Muslims are not ... just like all Americans are not ... We should not judge people that are trying to do well, trying to get along, trying to be good citizens, trying to be like us, by the same standard we judge those who have taken Islam as an excuse for violence. Just as we can't judge all Americans because one group in one place does one thing and another group in another place does another. So let's be very, very careful about stereotyping. Again, I hope this course has been beneficial to you. I hope it will be a course that will go with you and help you in your entire life, because many times understanding why people believe the way they believe helps us understand why they think the way they think. Students, once again, I wish you well. Take care.